Darren. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. It's a great privilege to be here. I love to be back in Vancouver, and it's great to see so many activists here in one place to talk about an issue I think is so important. I really appreciate the candor of activists like David and Anita earlier today, talking about post-traumatic stress, talking about burnout, worried about losing their way in the movement. So I'm going to talk for a short time because I really want to hear back from you. I'm hoping we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion. We all get into this movement with the very best intentions, but we often ignore our own health and happiness, and frequently we don't have the skills necessary to cope with the trauma. Now, trauma comes from the Greek word for wound, and I think that's very apt. And trauma can have a devastating impact on our psyches. And the traumatic event does not have to happen to us directly for it to be stressful. I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Witnessing or investigating animal cruelty, working in an animal shelter, watching documentaries with violent content, a series of non-traumatic but stressful experiences, even sharing a dinner table with someone who is eating an animal can be traumatic. In addition to our trauma that we experience, we also have everyday lives with all sorts of responsibilities and stresses that can push us and make us feel like we're about to burn out. So what is burnout? Well, it's a metaphor. It describes a state of exhaustion that is similar to wood succumbing to a fire. Now, its complement is another metaphor we use in the movement, recharging our batteries. Many of us come to conferences and events and workshops like this one because we want to recharge our batteries. We want to be around like-minded people, right? We want to feel inspired. We don't want to have to worry if the food is vegan or not. Now, to those of us fighting for animal liberation, burnout is often the result of prolonged exposure to suffering and injustice. It can feel a lot like depression. In fact, some say burnout is depression. But however you define it, a bad case of burnout can push you out of the movement altogether. So it's important that we're able to recognize the symptoms of burnout before it sneaks up on us. And the symptoms of burnout are really the symptoms of stress. Headaches, abusing drugs or alcohol, trouble sleeping, either insomnia or oversleeping, change in your eating habit, either loss of appetite or overeating, fatigue, boredom, difficulty in relationships. Now, I'm not saying that if you suffer from one or more of these symptoms, you're burned out or even stressed out. All I'm suggesting is that we maintain an awareness about our physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual well-being if you have a spiritual practice, so that we can be proactive about burnout. So I'm going to offer a couple sets of advice, points for discussion later, if you like. And The first set comes from activists from around the world, people that I've talked to in the course of my work as an activist and as an author. And these are going to be in addition to two of the most important things that you can do, that you should already be doing. And the first is getting plenty of rest, and the second is eating a proper diet. Now, if you didn't know that you're supposed to eat a proper diet, come talk to me later. All right, so let's start off with find a good fit. One of the best ways to avoid getting burned out is to match your style of campaigning with your interests and strengths, thereby creating activism that is nourishing. All right, next, include achievable goals. So if you're somebody who works on campaigns, make sure that you're including not only long-term goals that might not be achieved for years, and can be frustrating, but shorter-term goals that can be acknowledged and celebrated more frequently. Next one, very important, learn to say no. Now, this can be very difficult for people like us who consider ourselves very compassionate, but we already have a lot of stress in our lives, so we need to be able to tactfully tell people no. All right? So I know a lot of you are taking notes. I'd like you to write down some of these phrases. I can't this time. Sorry, not today. Thanks, but I've already got too much on my plate. And my personal favorite, that won't work for me, but I'll get back to you if anything changes. Next, disconnect from technology. I don't know many things more depressing than reading the comments on Facebook. So try to make a habit out of staying away from social media, mobile devices, the news for at least an hour a day if you can do it. If you can do it, all right? Now related to this is make time for yourself. Resist the temptation to turn every hobby and interest outside the movement into an excuse to help animals. Some of you are thinking that you do that. I do it too, but I'm going to give you a better example. I know an activist who was on the verge of burning out, so she took up jogging and felt great about it. And being a natural leader, she organized a group of her friends, and together they'd go running through the neighborhood. Well, one day her activist gene kicked in. She looked around at all these blank t-shirts and thought, we should all have pro-animal messages on our shirts. Right, before long she was the leader of a vegan running club, and she was burdened with many of the stresses she was trying to avoid in the first place. The good news is she's still very active in the movement, maybe because she followed this next piece of advice. To go with this, all I could come up with was Peter Brady singing It's Time to Change. I apologize for that. If you're doing all you can to avoid the depression and the guilt, the grief, the stress that comes along with your activism, and you still feel that you're on the verge of burning out, it might be time to switch your viewpoint, to try something else within the movement. Now, this is not giving up. This is simply saying, what I'm doing right now isn't working for me. It's probably not working for the animals. It's time to try something else. All right, my point is, if we're going to be in this long term, if we're committed to this, we have to take care of ourselves. Now, here's a second set of suggestions, and this is my own. This is something I had developed some years ago. I call it the active approach to avoiding burnout. You might have heard of it. It's a 6-step process because each letter in the word active stands for one of the steps. So we begin with A. Allow yourself to be human. Hard as we try, we're not superheroes. We're not going to win every battle. So please give yourselves a break. take a real vacation, go out with friends, go to the pub, go to the movies, have fun, and try not to feel guilty. All right, C is create something tangible to remind you of your victories. This could be a folder, this could be a website, this could be a scrapbook with headlines of successful campaigns you've worked on. Anything that you can refer to when you're feeling depressed, when you're feeling down, guilty, grieving, angry, to remind you you're fighting the good fight. T, talk to someone you trust. Boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, teacher, best friend. If you have one person with whom you dare to be yourself, that's a tremendous gift. Animal activism is an emotionally loaded endeavor, and it's critical we're able to unburden ourselves. If you don't have someone in your life you can really talk to a therapist. Okay, I ignore upsetting texts and images. I'm talking about videos, books, magazines. Because if you're feeling that depression come on, it's not going to be the time to get out Earthlings to share it with Uncle Fred. Give yourself some time, and come back to it later. Unfortunately, all those images, all that text is still going to be there. All right, V is visit an animal sanctuary. Now, V could also be for volunteer at an animal sanctuary, just like my friend here, Jocelyn York, and her friend Lois at Vine Sanctuary in Vermont. I've spent probably hundreds of hours at sanctuaries, and I'm constantly amazed by how many activists have never rubbed a pig's belly, or watched a hen take a dust bath, or whistled to a turkey to hear him gobble back. Get some face time with the faces you're working so hard to protect. And if you volunteer, it's a great place to work up a sweat, which brings me to E, exercise. Run, bike, hike, yoga, go to the beach and jump over towels. Whatever you can do, get out there and do it. Don't underestimate the power of exercise, getting your heart going. It's a great stress relief. Now, there's no way that I could talk about burnout in 20 minutes, 40 minutes, even 2 hours, and really impart enough information to you. So I have, for those of you who like homework, I have 2 book assignments for you. Two good books that I recommend that you can read for more information. The first is Aftershock by Patrice Jones. Patrice has been in this movement a long time, but before that, she was a clinician dealing with people with trauma. This is an amazing book. I highly recommend it. And the next is this little thing called Striking at the Roots. I wrote this in 2008, and I have a whole chapter dedicated to burnout. A lot of the material I'm talking about right now comes from the book. I think that it's important that we view activism as self-care. Not think of activism on one side, burnout on the other. I think it's important that we see that activism is how we manifest a better, safer world. It's through activism that we validate our life experiences, our trauma, and find healing. And through activism, we sustain ourselves as we seek liberation for all. I love this quote by civil rights activist Audre Lorde, who said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." So I want to see if you have any questions. If advice on how you've dealt with burnout. If you have any criticisms of my use of PowerPoint, anything at all? That is a first. If nobody, oh, good, thank you. The question is about my book, Striking at the Roots, published by Changemakers. How much do I read? Yeah, it's a lot more in depth. I talked to 120 activists from around the world, and I asked every single one of them what they do to beat burnout. I talked to psychologists, and it's a concise how-to on how to avoid being burned out, what to do if you're feeling burned out, and ways to stay in the movement if you so choose. So that was Striking at the Roots. The question is, was there anybody I talked to who was so self-aware that they did not burn out? Well, if part of being self-aware is knowing how to take care of yourself, then the answer is yes. I don't know of any activist who was starting to feel burned out and then said, the animals have it worse, I'm just going to push through and manage to come out the other end feeling better. No. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess I'll phrase it differently. The ones the activists you talked to did pretty much all of the experience burnout.
Yes. Everybody that I talked to who answered that question about burnout had something to offer, had felt, for whatever reason, sometimes they worked in a sanctuary, sometimes they worked in a shelter. Some people were just doing street activism and were bombarded by the public. It wasn't necessarily that they saw animal cruelty, it was that they had to deal with humanity. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Carl, back.
It's easy to feel despondent about the slow pace of animal liberation, but I would suggest that to me and to many other people, coming to this meeting here, hearing you speak, and all the people that make this happen is such an incredible, uplifting experience that it brings joy to us all, because we realize we have come a long way, and thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about your own experience.
Yeah. I started off in 2001 as an activist, and I started working in rabbit rescue, and felt I got started as an activist pretty much the same month that I became vegan, ethical vegan, and I decided to start adopting or trying to foster rabbits. I ended up adopting them all. That's another story. And learning about the plight of the rabbit, how they're used in every imaginable way, from vivisection to entertainment to meat to fur. It was just very, very disheartening, and I started having nightmares. And I actually spoke to an art therapist about it. I just happened to mention that I'm now having these nightmares about rabbits. And she recommended that I paint a box, that I just take this, anything that I can find, just a cheap box or something, and just paint scenes on every side that bring me joy and remind me why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I painted that box, and she said, every time you have a nightmare, write it down, tear it up, and put it in the box. And this must have been 12 years ago. And after I painted the box, I stopped having nightmares. And I'm not saying that necessarily that that's why, but I think I was in fear of writing my nightmares down, and I think that somehow my mind just said to kind of push these things out. But that's the way that the first thing that came up for me was these nightmares that I was having. Now, subsequent to that, I've done a lot of different types of activism. I've been inside factory farms, and I've done liberations and seen the conditions that the animals are living in, and that was probably some of the worst experiences that I've ever had. And I really just decided to follow my own advice and to watch silly movies on Friday nights and maybe have an adult beverage and just try to take a break and take time for myself and just laugh and try to remember that we're all in this together, and I can always scale back if I need to, but so far I haven't. So far I've gotten more active, but so far so good. Sorry for the long answer. Thank you for the question. Yeah. David? Yeah.
Third difference, not certain about the terms. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
No. Post-traumatic stress, my understanding, and I'm not a clinician, but that would be when you have an experience that is so traumatic that in different periods afterward, you will experience a stressor or a trigger that will bring back that same emotion. That term, post-traumatic stress disorder, became very popular after the Vietnam War, when we had a lot of soldiers coming back. They used to call it shell shock in the Second World War. So you had these wartime experiences, and they would, hear a backfire of a car and relive that moment when they were near a shell when it dropped, or they see something in a movie or a TV show that they know is fictional, and they'll have the same visceral experience of when they saw their friend die, that type of a thing. So PTSD is a very extreme reaction, but having that can definitely lead to burnout. Yes. Yes.
If you want to, I can add to that.
Oh, great. I hope I didn't completely mess up the
No,
answer.
you didn't. It's just, I think there's probably some overlap if you think of it as Venn diagrams, right? You talk about how burnout reflections,
Right.
enjoyment in life, being and so on, lack of energy. And I think obviously there's post-traumatic stress as well, when everybody needs the clinical criteria for it. But if there's symptoms of experiencing that you mentioned, like nightmares, having to do with memories, emotional experiences, and there's like avoidance and numbing to avoid the things that cause you that stress, and also physiological arousal, if you're quite agitated and easy to start out triggered, you have to think about those. But a lot of people might not meet full criteria for the disorder, but have like subclinical symptoms, right? And that might overlap with some
Great. Thank you so much for having that.
The awareness piece is what I was talking about, because sometimes if you're, if you will be able to speak to this, sorry to go on, but the awareness, sometimes you're not aware when you're in post-traumatic stress. So when you're talking about awareness and its value in burnout, perhaps when you're in a further version of that post-traumatic stress, you actually don't know. Somebody else has to help you, or you need outside help.
Well, yeah, I think, self-awareness, again, it operates on a continuum. Some people might be aware, some others might not.
Yeah.
Whether, burnout or post-traumatic stress.
You got another question?
I did, and I don't know if it's something that's specific to me, or if it's maybe broader, but personally, I feel myself that if I break a hierarchy of activism, so stuff like Sea Shepherd and like actually, releasing animals, going to slaughterhouses and whatnot to do that sort of like, an unattainable holy grail that I think I would perhaps, if just
sounds like you're doing exactly what you should do, because you know what your threshold is. You know that if you go beyond this point, I mean, for me, it's probably doing investigations in a slaughterhouse, something my wife Lauren has done, and I am astounded that she can do it, or that she was able to do it. I could not do that. I've been asked to do investigations, undercover investigations, and I've declined so far because it's just, I know myself, and you know yourself, and please do not berate yourself for feeling you're not doing enough because you feel that you should be doing more. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. If you feel good about your activism, right, that's right there's your answer. Because I mentioned earlier, find a good fit. Create activism that is nourishing to you. Because that's how you're going to stay in it in the long term. Now, having said that, I do advocate that we try to stretch our boundaries if we can. Try something new. I had never done leafleting before when I started activism because I'm very shy. And I didn't want to go out in public and talk to them about veganism. I was afraid of the questions I would get. And then I learned I didn't have to have all the answers. It was okay to say, I'm sorry, I don't know, but if you give me your contact information, I'll find it out for you. So that's one example. So I pushed myself, but it doesn't mean that I have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and do something that I know is going to scar me emotionally. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you're tabling, you're getting comments from people who aren't vegan, telling you about the animals that they maybe kind of laughing to themselves or trying to make you feel uncomfortable, or
trying to get a reaction from me, or justifying your actions.
yeah. Well, I know that there are other people in the room who would want to comment on that because many of us have experienced that, but I'll just quickly answer for myself and say that we're all on a different path. None of us, very few of us anyway, were born and raised vegan. And so I try to be patient with people. However, it reaches a point, if somebody's being belligerent about it, at that point I just don't waste my time. I just try to move on to the next person. Although I understand sometimes that's difficult. But has anybody tabled or been in a situation where they've been doing outreach and somebody has been pushing them about the meat that they eat or the animal products that they consume?
It happens all the time.
Yeah, and how do you react?
So I thought this the first opportunity, like if I feel that the person I'm speaking with is not, just decided not to receive anything or listen to anything that I have to say, and I don't want to waste my time with that.
Okay. I saw some other hands nodding. Anybody else want to chime in? Mm-hmm. She was talking about, I'm sorry, this answer?
Same, just strike a bond with as the person mentioned, all of us probably be at some point in our life, so we can try to relate to how I felt after now change.
Oh, sorry, I was answering the question of you run into people who are just so belligerent, you just want to ask them that, or is what you.
Well, yeah, that's an extreme example of what she was asking about. But just a situation where you're out doing outreach and people just want to talk to you about the animal products that they're eating. So I think a lot of these people feel guilty about it, frankly.
Okay.
And
No, I got lots of time with people who want to have a conversation. Yeah, there was.
yes. Yeah, people have different coping mechanisms, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah, I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and I thought of veganism as really extreme. And then I started doing reading, and I started learning the stories of cows and hens from the dairy and the egg industry, and that just changed me. So we're all in a continuum, and I'm the same way. Not that I was belligerent with people, but I thought I'd never be vegan. So you never know what it's going to take to change people. All right. Oh, yes. Yeah, the question, if I can paraphrase, is do I feel inspired or encouraged by how much the vegan world has changed in the last 10, 15 years? Yes. I just completed a book recently that'll be out in July, A Vegan Ethic, published by Changemakers. And as part of that book, I did a lot of research about veganism and how it's kind of gone from moment to mainstream. And I was just so encouraged by all the facts that I was seeing, how many vegan restaurants there are, how many people are going on Google and searching vegan recipes and veganism in general. So yeah, that was hugely inspiring to me, absolutely. Oh yeah, 15 years ago you could not get a veggie burger at a restaurant. Now we have Amy's drive-thru 15 minutes from where I work. So it's just, yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. Okay, I think that's probably about our time, but thank you very much. Oh, one thing I do want to say, if you had a question and you wanted to reach out to me personally, you can reach me on my Facebook page. You can private message me. And I'll be here all day tomorrow too, so love to chat with anybody. Thank you very much.